What's up, podcast peeps? Glad to have you here for another edition of Daily Scone. I want to talk about something today that happened earlier this week on my radio show AFR and how I deal with issues of profanity and when to use it on the show and when not to, and particularly how it might be perceived by certain audiences. Real quick, though, I want to remind you, if you have not done so yet, please hit the subscribe button. That helps me tremendously. Rate us on iTunes, all that stuff. It's a big, big help. Also, if you're not familiar, every single morning around 7:20 a.m. Central, I do a Facebook Live show called Morning Scone. So I'd love it if you could check out my Facebook page and pop in on that. We talk sports on that show for about 20, 30 minutes on a Facebook Live, like literally every single morning. So here's hoping you could pop in on that as well when you get a chance. So earlier this week, I got a tweet from someone chastising me because on my radio show, I played and edited a bleeped version of Jarvis Landry's rant on HBO's Hard Knocks. Now, a little context for those that maybe missed this. Hard Knocks is an HBO series. It chronicles every year a different NFL team in training camp. So it's sort of a behind-the-scenes look at NFL training camp. And remember, this is HBO, so there's no need for FCC regulations when it comes to vulgarity or things like that. So the Hard Knocks cameras caught Jarvis Landry, who's a former LSU wide receiver, now at the Cleveland Browns, caught Jarvis Landry giving a speech to the wide receiver group in a meeting room. And Jarvis stands up in front of the room, and he goes on about a 2-minute long profanity-laced tirade at his fellow receivers, just chastising the culture in Cleveland. They're 1-31 in their last two seasons. They've been the worst team in the NFL for a decade, but over that period anyway. And he's laying into guys who aren't practicing because they're hurt, and he's talking about how it's poison and it's a contagious culture, and it's why they're losing. And of course, actually, USA Today counted it was 1,080 words, and there were many expletives, F's and B's and S's and all everything you can imagine. And the video went viral. So it was one of these things that everybody on Twitter, on social sites, like even if you don't watch Hard Knocks, everybody saw this video earlier in the week. It was something that, every news aggregator picked up this video and ran with it because it was so striking. Great. It was just this contrast. Great player, wants to be elite, talking, who joined a crappy team, and now this is sort of his charge to fight the culture in that locker room, which is why they've lost. So anyway, for many reasons, it was compelling, and of course, Jarvis played at LSU. So for my audience, I'm thinking, okay, this is a Cleveland Browns story, but it's relevant here because that's a beloved former LSU player. So that's how you find the local tie. And I say all the time, there are always, always, always stories. Sometimes it's that angle, though. You go find someone who has ties to your audience doing something else. Maybe not someone just specifically with LSU or specifically with the Saints now, but a former player, Tiger, someone who's from this area originally who's playing elsewhere now. So Jarvis was a great example of that. So I see this video and I think to myself, I've got to play this. This is a viral piece of video. It involves a former LSU Tiger. I love Jarvis Landry. He happens to be if he's not my favorite LSU player ever, he's on the short list. So for many reasons, I was emotionally drawn to it as well. Love the video. It reinforced why I love Jarvis Landry. That attitude was how he played every down at LSU. It didn't matter if he was, a decoy receiver, how he was cutting out of a break, how he was attacking a football, if he was covering special teams or blocking. That's how he plays every snap, which is why he's beloved, in large part, why he's beloved. So anyway, I know I'm going to play this on air. So I have to give it to Tony, our video producer. I'm like, can you edit this? So Tony does, and he goes and did a fantastic job through all of the profanity, editing it with bleeps. And I play it on air for in its entirety. And so I have to go back to making the decision to play it first. and when it's effective. So if something is gratuitous, I wouldn't always elect to play it if it was something that was profane just to be gratuitous. But in this instance, it was the tone that was the compelling part. And it wasn't a funny speech. It wasn't profanity to get a laugh. That's what delivered the punch. That's how you got. And also the other thing as well is understand now with my radio show on television, there's also a visual element here whereby I can show this video, of course attributing to HBO, while bleeping the audio. So visually, our television audience, our stream audience, can see it as well. So it was a no-brainer at all for me to play it. And what I got from a listener on Twitter was, I can't believe you would play that. You have kids listening to the show. Grow some responsibility, is what he tweeted at me. And so this is a batting practice fastball over the heart of the plate for me. Because I hate this objection and I hate this argument, because the kids listen argument is something I will literally never consider for any piece of content I do on my show. My audience, my demographic, my target audience is men aged 25 to 54. Not that dissimilar at all from HBO and Hard Knocks. It's probably the exact same demographic that Hard Knocks is going to target. So that speech is actually mirrors what HBO was trying to accomplish in airing that. I was as well. Because our audiences mirror each other. So I will never apologize because your kid was in the car while my show was on air and I played something that you found offensive. Here's a couple of things that you got to know. Number one, it was edited for air. We use bleeps. So the FCC regulates what we can and what words can and cannot be said on air. And we edited it for air. So it was clean for air. That's number one. Number two, as I mentioned, my audience is men aged 25 to 54. I wasn't airing this on the Disney Channel or Disney Radio. This was on a sports talk radio station with an older male demographic. And number three, I even gave a verbal warning on air before I hit play. I told my audience, hey, look, this is really profane, it's edited, but if you have kids in the car, if you find that uncomfortable, if this makes you uncomfortable, change the channel now. And then come back a little bit later, but change it because this might offend you. So I in three ways covered myself for people to not expose their children to something they didn't want them exposed to, or anybody who might find that offensive. So anybody who would still be offended by that is someone who by nature is just looking to be offended. If you had your child in the car and you heard, first of all, you're listening to adult male sports talk show, you heard me set this up saying it's profane and warned you to change the channel, yet you continued to listen with your child in the car, and then you're offended, that's on you, Jack. And when I replied exactly that to this person and said, learn how to parent your child. That's on you. So grow some parenting responsibility if that offends you. That's like taking your child, your 8-year-old, into a PG-13 movie and then being offended by some of the content. Well, it's rated PG-13 for a reason. Don't be offended when you walk in there and there's language and content that isn't appropriate for an 8-year-old. They told you that with the warning when you walked in. So I'll never, ever, ever apologize for that. And what's more is I actually go to great lengths not to curse on the radio. There are words that are acceptable by the FCC. You can say damn. You can say bitch. You can even say words that I find offensive that I would never say on certainly on air, and would take a rare circumstance in life for me to say. The P word relating to female genitalia. Like, that's a creepy word to me, but there are people that use it in whatever context in radio, and that's okay. Douche is another word that is acceptable on air that I find very uncomfortable in any intelligible conversation or intelligent conversation, using that word to convey a message. The only time that I would use, you can say ass as well on air. There's only, it would have to be an instance where I am absolutely going for effect or reaction if I'm going to use one of those words. And it would be as an emphasizing point, as an exclamation to what I'm saying. But it's not something that I would ever just casually use continuously, because I find it, I know when I'm listening to something, if someone is continuously using those profanities, I find it distracting, unnecessary and distracting. There's enough, you can say hell on the air, what the hell are you thinking? That's a hell of a good time. That sort of thing for emphasis. I find that distracting because it's completely unnecessary. I mean, you can find other adjectives that fit and are probably more effective than saying that all the time. This set me off because I operate in those instances out of really an abundance of caution and a feeling of I'm very aware of when I'm going to use profanity, and I'll only do it if I feel it's necessary or I could emphasize a point. And in the specific instance with Jarvis Landry, I was overly cautious to warn my audience. But as far as if I was going to play it, that never entered my mind as far as whether or not I was going to. And I will never, ever apologize or even consider, if a child's in a car, whether or not I'm going to put a piece of content over the air, ever. Because my audience, my show isn't a show for children. It's not Sesame Street. It's not Mr. Rogers' Neighborhood. And the number one rule of any broadcast is know your audience. And my audience is predominantly men aged 25 to 54. And men aged 25 to 54 aren't by nature going to be offended by Jarvis Landry's speech. They're the ones that are going to applaud, by and large, Jarvis Landry's speech. So it's not even a question of whether or not I was going to play it. So I hope that helps give some background, just a little of the thought behind how I use language and what I find appropriate and what I will use and when I'll use it and when I won't. And I think everybody abides by different rules, within the regulations of the FCC. And look, in this format, a digital format, because the FCC does not regulate the internet, I can say whatever I want. I could be as profane and vulgar as I wanted to be, but my choosing not to is sort of an illustration of kind of how I like to convey myself and how I like to be portrayed. So, anyway, I hope that helps, and I'd love feedback as always. So, always feel free to shoot me a message. You can email me, mattmoscona@gmail.com, MattMoscona, mattmoscona@gmail.com. As I say every day, please hit the subscribe button. That just helps me so much. If you like this, the best thing you can do to help me is share it. Tell somebody about it, or hit the share button on Facebook or Twitter or wherever you're seeing this. That just helps me immensely. So if you could share it, pass it on, I would love it very much if you could do that. As always, if you have feedback, please provide it. And until next time, this has been Daily Scone.